Well, just to start off, we wanted for you to tell us what your experience is and just what your responsibilities are now at the city.
Yeah, totally. So, like, my background also in sustainability work.
Yeah, because you were the head of the Environmental Center for us, right?
I'm Natalie Quinn.
And I'm Danika Brabec.
We're first-year students at Fort Lewis College. I'm double majoring in environmental studies and political science.
And I'm majoring in psychology with a writing minor. We're working on our final project for our honors 200 class, Humanitarian Development.
Today's podcast is separated into two portions. First, an interview with Marty Pool, the Sustainability Director for the City of Durango. Second, a discussion between Danika and myself about what we green spaces and urban planning.
So I got involved with environmental and sustainability stuff. So my background is actually in architectural engineering, and I first got into this work through green building work.
Okay.
So, efforts to reduce energy and water consumption in buildings, make buildings more sustainable and just better places to inhabit. And then from there, transitioned into doing more work in policy and management around sustainability. And then that also got me connected into higher ed and working with sustainability in higher ed, which I think is pretty cool. Opportunity to educate students on the topics, but also do sustainability work. So that was my work with the Environmental Center at Fort Lewis College. And then now at the city, doing a lot of planning and projects and efforts around the services the city can provide and the plans we're putting forth as a community to be more sustainable and to guide that work.
Awesome. How long were you at the fort?
5.5 years.
Cool. Mainly focusing on the incorporation of green spaces and community gardens in an urbanized area. And I feel like you have an opportunity here at Durango really have a say in that, because I feel like Durango is in the process of urbanizing.
Yeah.
Compared to other cities which have already urbanized and are now trying to figure out ways to de-urbanize a little bit. Durango is a little spot that they can urbanize with sustainability in mind.
Yeah.
So I guess our first question was, what are your thoughts on Durango's urbanization, and if you guys have any plans, if any, that the city of Durango has to incorporate sustainability for the next 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the plan goes, I'm actually in the process of finalizing our sustainability plan update for our community. So the last officially adopted sustainability plan was from 2015. And a lot of it focused on specifically what the city, as a municipality, so city operations could do to be more sustainable. Right. And this new plan speaks to that still. So, how can city facilities use less energy, or how can the city, reduce its gasoline use in its vehicles? What services can it provide to help citizens be more sustainable? So we're still speaking to all of that, but then we're also expanding the scope and talking just community-wide. What are our goals as a community in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions, our water consumption?
Right.
So we do certainly engage in those planning efforts, and it's a combination of, getting the expertise from the staff at city departments, the input from city council, and then also a ton of input from community members, so that it's our community-wide plan represents everyone that lives here. And then a lot of other plans and guiding documents from our transportation plan, our parks and recreation plans, our water plans. Cities put forward a lot of plans because we are
naturally.
We represent the people, and so we have to get those ideas down into something, and it's plans. Sustainability is incorporated into a lot of that. As far as urbanization goes, Durango has done a pretty incredible job over its history in terms of managing how our community is structured, the physical space of our community. We have a pretty high density for a town of our size, which is really impressive, and that tends to be a more sustainable approach, uses up less land area, uses less resources like water for just big acre wide lawns for everybody. So in general, density is a good thing. It also leads to more people biking and walking places than using their vehicles. Less paved surfaces, contributing to like stormwater issues and heat islands. So all kinds of benefits to density. It also just creates a more livable human scale environment to walk around and just enjoy as opposed to a person in a car.
Right.
So I think Durango's done a pretty incredible job as a community around that. I think continued urbanization for Durango is going to be probably an increase in that density.
Like apartment complexes, etc.
In apartment complexes, discussions about, how we manage parking in our spaces.
Yeah.
Will parking continue to be free everywhere or not? Managing how people get around using transit and other options, where we're putting parks, what we are allowing, what our codes allow for in different parts of our community. So it's, I think the goal is just to make sure that we're not just spreading out unchecked into our surrounding landscape.
Right. I was interested, how does urban green spaces play into these plans, specifically, I guess, parks and then also community gardens? And is there any attempt by the city of Durango to incorporate local farms and stuff into the planning? There's stuff like farm to table and that sort of thing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So when you think about a community, how a community is using its land, its actual physical space on the ground, there are essentially public space and private space.
Yeah.
Public space, that is how the community chooses to use that public space, usually goes through the public process. Should this be a park? Should we put our trails? There is that public engagement option. Private spaces, basically, as soon as someone owns a swath of land, kind of do whatever they want with it within what's allowed under the city code.
Right.
And so what can the city do, or what is driving the city's options for what we do with our green space, what citizens choose to do in the spaces that they own, is really driven by those two things. One is the community members' engagement in the public process to say, okay, we are developing this new section of the city. What should that be? Should it be a park? Should it be houses? Should it be different things like that? Who's going to own that? Does the city own a portion of it, or is part of it privately owned? Within the city right now, all of that is kind of spoken for. The city owns its spots, private owners own their spots, and so in terms of the city's space, we have our parks, we have our trails, we have the different city-owned plots of land, but how we choose to use those can definitely evolve. Is it going to be a soccer field, or is it going to be a community garden? Right. Could be either. What do the citizens want? And then in terms of the private ownership, that's very much around, like I said, code. Mm-hmm. So ensuring that our code allows for things like people to have gardens in their front yards or backyards. Mm-hmm. People to, the code can get really specific in terms of what you are and aren't allowed to do. Right. And so part of that is city staff and city council updating the code based on, or bringing proposed updates for city council to vote on. The other piece is community members bringing proposed updates to the code for city council to vote on. So I'll just share one example. Right now, composting is allowed in our backyards. Mm-hmm. That wasn't always the case. We had to write that into the code, and community members had to bring that forward and say, we want to be able to compost in our backyard legally. Right. And so we have to allow for the code amendments to allow for that.
Cool. So my research was focused a little bit more on agriculture
and
food production. So I was just wondering, one of the things that I found a lot of my research was the integration of public and private spaces with plants or agricultural, particularly agricultural plants? And is there any interest or planning for that for Durango's future urbanization or updating of developments?
Yeah. So again, the conversation I think goes two directions. You're talking about publicly owned spaces or publicly managed spaces or privately owned and managed spaces. So publicly owned spaces, there's currently no efforts that I'm aware of to, convert, say, a city-owned park into a community garden.
Right.
And not because I think there's certainly that could be a possibility. There's nothing preventing that from happening.
I mean, there's one at Fort Lewis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Fort Lewis is an interesting case because they are a public entity. They're a state college, but in the eyes of City of Durango planning, it's a private space because it's not the city. Mm-hmm. It's basically Fort Lewis College gets to do whatever they want on Fort Lewis College property within the code and law. But so I think what it would take to get community space, public parks going in that direction, it would take initiative from citizens. So they'd have to start bringing this issue to city council and signing petitions saying, we want this to happen.
Right.
We want to, and then saying, okay, where's the funding going to come from? Why should we dedicate funding to this? All of that kind of process. And then it would be up to the city to say that it gets adopted and move forward. Then it would be, how the space is laid out, and then the city's continued plans for directing city funding towards managing those spaces, and what would that look like? On the private side, essentially, the city's job there is just make sure that codes aren't getting in the way of citizens wanting to do that effort. So if somebody owns a half acre of property within the city and they want to start a community garden, we shouldn't stop them, right? Go for it. And as far as I know and best I can tell, that absolutely is allowed to happen. Then the question becomes, is that the most valuable use of that land? And I think community gardens and agriculture in an urban space are competing with what else could a private owner do with that space?
Right, building apartments or anything else the corporations want to build there to make money, right?
Yeah, and corporations or even just individual people, do I want to buy a house, build a house, renovate a house, rent it out? With the cost of housing and the shortage of housing in our community is really a challenge, because the number one thing that people want to do with space right now within Durango is to build houses on it.
Right.
And it's hard to argue against that sometimes when the cost of housing is really high. So when you have a limited resource, it can be a challenging discussion around what to do with that resource. In this case, the resource is land area.
Right.
And are there any current or proposed ideas on how to advise either private corporations or private individuals to grow food on their own land, or for corporations to integrate parts of their building or spaces as green spaces or as agricultural spaces, as well as incentivizing a public organization like the City of Durango?
Yeah. There are not any incentives currently that I'm aware of, although that's a great idea. Usually incentives can take the form of allowed use, or there's all these requirements when you develop a piece of land, when you build something or change the use of a plot of land in the city. And usually, how can you get people to do one thing over another thing? One is the fees and the costs that are associated with doing one option.
Right.
You can raise or lower those. The other thing is you can give people or developers a pass if they choose to do this one thing instead of this other thing, and it ends up in their best interest. So I'll give an example. There still are currently minimum parking requirements in Durango, and that costs money. People would, believe it or not, private owners would rather not build parking spaces because a parking space doesn't make you any money.
Right.
You'd rather build another bedroom on the apartment complex in that space. So anyway, parking's a whole nother discussion. But we have an incentive right now where if you put an EV charging station or a bicycle rack, it counts as a parking space. So they can put that in and get credit for a parking space. They had to do it anyways. Here's this other option that you have on the table. Right. So we could potentially write some of those incentives into the code. Say, instead of doing, because there's some landscaping requirements. Right. So instead of putting XYZ landscaping in your space, you could dedicate a space for a community garden, and that would count. So those are some options, but none of those exist right now.
Right. I was wondering, so first, when you talk about green spaces, you always have to talk about water availability too. Mm-hmm. I don't know, what's the situation with water in Durango right now? I know that, I'm interested in water politics, and I've taken some classes on it.
Yep.
And from my understanding is, Durango has water rights.
Yep.
We have water rights, and they're pretty well established. And so we'll probably be one of the last ones affected in the Southwest if water happens to go away, which it probably will.
Yeah.
So, what is Durango planning right now in terms of their park spaces? Anything? Is there anything going towards saving water? Because everyone loves green spaces and everyone loves grass, but it's a dual. I love grass, but it takes a lot of water. So is there anything we can do with this space that keeps beauty and comfortable? Because grass is comfortable, right? So
right.
How do you balance the water aspect, park aspect, I guess?
Yeah, and this is actually something that's going on on FLC's campus as well, as discussions of how you're using the land. So I think in the future, as water, as the projections are that we will have less runoff, less snowpack. You are right that Durango has water rights. We're high up in the watershed. Durango essentially we have more than enough water for the foreseeable future in terms of what our community needs. It's a very different story for a farmer that has really junior water rights, and some years they might not even be able to water their crops. So we have the water rights to support our typical purposes in the city: water use in buildings, water use on our grounds. But as those become scarcer, we are going to have conversations around where should we have grass. Right. Grass is great in certain applications. We've just, in my opinion, overused grass.
I agree. Especially in the Southwest, if you have grass in your front yard, sure, it looks nice on a magazine. What's the true purpose of that? Yeah. That plant being there.
Especially when you have native plants that will survive better.
They survive better. They provide better habitat for insects and pollinators, or even urban wildlife like birds and squirrels. So I think just guiding our landscaping choices towards more native, water-wise species that continue to have low maintenance. That's what you'll hear from our Parks and Rec staff up at FLC, is grass, once it's established, is actually pretty easy to take care of.
You just cut it once in a while.
Right, yeah.
That's all it needs.
So you need to design those spaces to be comparably low maintenance, or provide another function like a community garden where that takes more effort, but
there's a lot that comes out of it.
Right, yeah. The water is actual productive use. It goes into growing food. So, I think we will overall see that transition. And some of the things that could happen would be changes to our water utility rates that incentivize using water in different ways.
That makes sense. It makes me happy to hear that you guys have codes that specifically say, you can have a garden in your front yard, because gardens are definitely a better use of water. And I've definitely had experiences, HOAs are no gardens, and so it's good to hear that, that's planned into Durango's code right now. It's you can, it's your space, you can use it.
Yeah. I think in general, we are very much trying to not prevent people. Codes exist because one person wants to do one thing and another person wants to do another thing, and how do we agree on how to use our shared city space together, or even what my neighbor can do and what I'm allowed to do. But in general, I think the city's attitude is not to stand in the way of someone that wants to do something positive in their space. And fortunately, we live in a community where people see community gardens, they see water-wise landscaping as a positive thing. There are communities that require you to plant grass.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants it. There are certain people who want to see it that way, Right. So, I agree. I think it's cool that we have a code that allows people to use their land in different ways.
Yeah.
How can an an individual make changes to their lifestyle to be more sustainable? And are there any organizations or political people or movements that people can put in time, money, or votes towards to bring about a more sustainable future?
Yeah, there's tons. So the city's sustainability plan breaks environmental sustainability into 5 categories. So one is energy consumption, the other is transportation, another is waste and consumption. So that's like, I think about it as like materials and trash and recycling, composting. The next is water, and then the last is natural systems and ecology. So kind of like wild spaces and wildlife. Right. And so I really like to think about what you can individually do in any one of those areas. And really, if you're to boil it all down, it's just being conscious of your consumption and thinking of consumption in all kinds of ways. Like when I hop in my car and drive somewhere that's consuming gasoline, cars also consume space, like in parking. Like you have to put them somewhere, and that is that much less space that could be something else. Right. So I think in general, our personal choices are all around like broadening our idea of what is consumption, what resources are we consuming on this planet, and then to reduce that consumption individually. So that's, I think, the general, without giving like a laundry list of actions, the short list is like ride your bike, buy local food, be conscious of your energy and water conservation. Right. Like, yeah, turn off lights when you leave the room. But then as far as organizations to get involved with, I mean, there are so many. And I hesitate to list off any particular one just because literally there's so many. But really being conscious of the focus of an organization and, you know, are they advocating at the federal level? Are they advocating at the state level? There's groups here in town that advocate at the local level. So they organize people to go give those comments to city council. Right. It's pretty hard as one individual to review the city code and be like, I want to see this one change. Right. But you get a group of people together to kind of share those insights and have some of those expertise. And you actually can bring very specific changes at a local level. So I think those are the ways that, without giving specifics, you know, those are what you can consider around advocacy and pushing on power structures.
Yeah. Right. Adding on to that, do you have any recommendations for somebody who wants to, maybe their city isn't as environmentally minded and they want to get a group together and start advocating for things with their city? Do you have any recommendations for them?
Yeah. I think first is just to spend some time really getting a lay of the land. Mm. What I see a lot is people kind of assume nothing is being done in an area, but that's not always the case. It could just be that it's a long, challenging process to get these changes in place. And it's a winding path. It definitely, you can make it happen and you can be part of a movement that creates change. Things are definitely different now than they were a decade ago or 50 years ago. Yeah. Right. Change happens for sure, but it doesn't happen overnight and it doesn't happen automatically. So I think the recommendation, if you were to live in a community that didn't have a lot of the stuff in place that Durango already does, is do that research, understand the lay of the land, understand what organizations are working on what things, and then also understand what the processes are. Right. You know, who are the elected officials that have power in certain ways? How does our local government operate? When are opportunities for city council? Who can I talk to about city code? At the next level up at the state, what are those same, or even county or other regional, what is that process and what groups kind of have their finger on the pulse of that process? And then what topic do I care about? A lot of these groups, some work on wilderness designations, others work on wildlife protections, others work on waste and recycling issues. Pick your topic, pick your, scope or where you want to get involved, and there's going to be some organizations to plug into.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. So kind of just to close, I want to ask, how important are garden spaces to you specifically, and do you have any favorite memories as a child or a young adult regarding wild or green spaces?
Yeah. I think green spaces and wild spaces are incredibly important. I think if if you live in a community or even just in a home that doesn't have those, they're easy to forget about.
Right.
But once you notice they're gone, or once you notice that you're missing them, you kind of have that light bulb moment where it's like, oh, well, that's what I'm missing. I don't have a park nearby my house, or I don't have a backyard to go to, or I don't have a tree with nice shade to sit under.
Right.
Humans, there's an increasing amount of research showing that we have, like, it's good for our mental health to have.
That's what I've found is, like, anxiety rates go down, and, like, I feel like that's super important, especially, like, in the world we live now, because I feel like so many people don't have access, like we do in Durango, to green spaces. I mean, here, there's like hundreds of miles of bike trails, it feels like, that people can just go and bike and hike. But, in places like New York City or even Denver, areas like that, it's really easy to just let it slip on the wayside. And, there's rising anxiety rates, and I definitely feel like a part of it's tied to the fact that so many people don't have access to, like, green spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it can be a lot of things. Like, I do think that, again, there's that private and public balance. And so on a private scale, what can people do to create their own little, like, microcosm space? And also you asked, like, some fond memories. Like, my parents both loved their backyard. They planted so many amazing plants that kind of just enclosed the space in beautiful vegetation, and then we had garden boxes, and I helped them out, all growing up with those spaces. And for me, it was just something that we did, and it wasn't until, like, growing up and learning, first off, how much work that takes, but also also how rewarding it is, but also not everyone does that.
Right.
And so how can we educate people? How can we provide the resources to do that on their own and create their own little Gardens of Eden? On a public standpoint, I think it definitely is all about public entities taking on the responsibility to provide those spaces to everybody in their community.
Right.
Marginalized communities, lower income communities don't have the same access to those green spaces, but it's just as important, if not more important, because a lot of times lower income communities don't have their own private green spaces.
Right.
So they need public green spaces more than anybody.
Right.
And so I think prioritizing those as a community, recognizing their benefit, recognizing that a park actually is valuable compared to bulldozing it and
turning it into
a big box store or something that you get that tax revenue, but also, like, there's so much that you lost with that decision. So I just think that they're incredibly valuable for just the human experience, and I think we're a society starting to sort of rediscover that after having lost it for quite a while.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in some of my research, it was talking about how community gardens, people have started to find, are like a little storage of knowledge. So, like, before people were, like, super, they had to go to the store to buy food or whatever. Everyone grew food, and everybody would talk to your neighbor to grow food, and, like, everyone would have these, like, places in front of their house that they would grow these plants, and these plants would actually adapt to their little environment because, like, they'd be, like, microevolutioned, like, zucchini plants, because people would just always grow them. So I guess a question that I did write down, it's basically just about the existence of community-based knowledge and how they have an effect on, like, community gardens. And I'm glad you brought up marginalized communities and stuff, because I feel like you said, so much has been lost. It's definitely, like, super important, I think, for communities to provide these spaces, because, like, so much has been lost, so we have to, like, reteach ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that just depends on, there's all kinds of scales of community gardens.
Right.
And so I think at the smallest scale, little front yard gardens and stuff, are you growing enough food in that garden to support, subsistence?
Right.
Grow enough food to support yourself to eat over the course of a year? No.
Yeah.
But that space is definitely a place to, like, connect with other people, learn about gardening, just enjoy the experience just as a way to spend your time as a human being, which is super valuable, and you learn skills, and it's a really rewarding way to spend your time.
Right.
It's also a lot of work, so you have to acknowledge that. And then I think you have community gardens that are on the next larger scale, several acres, and those actually can provide quite a decent amount of subsistence for communities, and so then you're talking definitely, like, institutional knowledge or passing on knowledge of true, thinking more agriculture and actually growing food at a more highly skilled level. And then I think beyond that, then you have larger scale agriculture, which again requires that sharing of knowledge. And I think there is a lot of that in those communities. And we're rediscovering that now that we're getting away from that like super mechanized, super, I don't know, industrialized way of doing agriculture.
I mean, we've learned that we kill our soil by not treating it right. And so, there's definitely advantages to, looking to the past.
Yeah. And I think there's knowledge sharing at all of those levels, and so I think it's pretty cool to see, and how gardening provides the opportunity to share and connect.
Right.
Yeah.
Circling back to on an earlier part of our discussion, are there any alternatives to grass for the purpose of a soccer field or for having a place for like dogs to run around and poop?
Yeah.
Play fetch, stuff like that is more sustainable?
Yeah, so yes, and basically what you're looking at is super hardy plants that are drought tolerant. And so actually in my yard, I have a product, it's a cultivated grass. It's a Plant Select, which is like bred out of the SU extension. So it's called Dog Tough Grass, and I water it every 2 weeks, so super drought tolerant, super tough, resilient to like dogs playing on it and dog pee and stuff like that. So I think horticulturists working on developing new cultivated species that are like very resilient, very low water usage. I think being comfortable with certain kinds of what we would traditionally call weeds, but actually they're just like really well adapted plants for this area, like purslane and other, that stuff is all over the dog park, and it's good. It prevents erosion.
Genetic diversity.
Yeah, they have little flowers in the spring that are great for pollinators. So, and of course, there are some noxious weeds like tumbleweeds and other things that we really need to keep down because they are truly like detrimental for an ecosystem. But I think expanding what we consider a weed and what we don't. And then actually for certain spaces, you get into interesting conversations around like artificial alternatives.
Right.
So, using recycled plastic to make, turfs or things like that. It's hard because then that's very much an artificial green space, but it certainly doesn't use any water. It uses recycled plastic. So is that I don't know, does that have a place in the equation?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'd take a football field you don't have to water over a football field you do. So.
Yeah, I think especially around sports, it's on the one hand, you are using plastic, you're using a petroleum-based product. It's very artificial, but yeah, no chemical fertilizers, no water use. So yeah, looking at kind of the life cycle trade-offs between those two options is pretty interesting around sports fields or other grass alternatives.
After talking with Marty Pool, Danika and I sat down to discuss more in depth about the research that we did on these subjects. My favorite space growing up was my backyard. We had a half acre, and on that half acre, I would play all sorts of made-up games. My favorite game to play was Man vs. Wild. That space was a place where I could just be in a space without my parents. It was just a place for adventure. It was a place to explore the world and challenge myself. What did growing up in green spaces look like for you?
I grew up in a pretty suburban area, and there weren't any kids on my street, really, so I wasn't really able to do anything. And we did have some like walking paths out. They just kind of connected the neighborhoods. They were green belts, and we lived next to a river and a bike path, but that would have been too far away for 7-year-old me to go to on my own.
Yeah.
So I did go run around on the green belts a little bit, but like I didn't have really that many people to do that with, so it was pretty minimal.
What got you into biking?
My dad, he rode a mountain, not like pro or anything, but he would do that. And I really wanted to quit soccer because I hated soccer. So my parents were like, well, you have to do something over the summer. You can't just like sit inside. So they just kind of decided that I would do mountain biking, really.
Yeah.
And so I used my dad's like 20-year-old bike, and we would go ride around on the bike paths out near my house. What about you? Because I know that you're also mountain biking.
Mm-hmm. I was a ski racer before I was a mountain biker. I grew up skiing. I was one of those kids who was taught to ski when they were very young. I was probably 5 or 6 when I learned to ski. And so for me, that was my experience in the outdoors started there. I love being in the mountains since I knew what they were. I grew up in a pretty small mountain town. We had a junior high with 300 kids, and everyone there did outdoorsy things. We would go out and, hike or ski when it was wintertime, or my family had a boat and we would spend lots of time at the lake. And then getting into mountain biking, that was just when I stopped ski racing and I wanted to do something that kept me active and got me into the outdoors. And I was lucky enough to live in an area that facilitated mountain biking, which I think definitely was a big part of like doing it, because if trails weren't so easily accessible, I probably wouldn't have gotten into it. Garden-wise, my grandma had a garden. My grandpa was a farmer, and that was like, I didn't really have any ties to garden, but I wish I had gotten now. I wish I had utilized that resource of which that my grandparents had now, because now I'm interested in doing gardening of my own. When we had land, my mom would try and do gardens. I remember when I was like a young teenager, we had a potato patch that was successful despite the mountain climate, which isn't always useful to growing foods. And the food we used from that garden lasted a pretty long, which I was always kind of surprised by. I feel like a lot of people just view garden hobby instead of what it once was, which was had food.
Yeah, but it is more of a hobby now. Like, you
No, yeah. No. Obviously. But, like, I know a lot of people who, like, don't think they could ever grow enough food. Like, they just don't think it's possible to, like, grow enough food to sustain themselves without ever going to a grocery store.
Yeah, well, you don't need to grow enough food to sustain yourself, to have a garden.
No, obviously. And, green spaces are definitely more than just what they can provide for you in a
material sense.
Exactly. Green spaces are beautiful, too. And, a place to go. Maybe the demands of life are a lot more than, like just going out and sitting by a tree sometimes makes me, I don't know, what do you think?
We didn't really have the space to garden. We had a backyard space, but it was too shady to really grow anything. Mm-hmm. The internet is a great resource for learning gardening skills. So just because you don't have a person in your life who can teach you doesn't mean that you can't do something. Mm-hmm. With the benefits of the World Wide Web. I mean, I think gardening is a great way to help offset some of the burdens of commercial farming on the environment. It's less transport time, probably less chemical and stuff put into the ground. You're probably going to be planting your crops in a way that will let the soil be a little bit more at rest.
Like healthy.
Because you aren't, trying to turn a profit.
Right.
And you can't, you're not gonna like spend a bunch of money to get fertilizers every year. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I'm plant-based and have been for almost 5 years now. And it's interesting seeing both sides of the argument when it comes to being plant-based, because like plant-based isn't going to save the world, like going plant-based, but small actions do. Like I have to believe that small actions do help. The amount of carbon dioxide and methane that industrial farming, especially in regards to meat processing, is pretty large. We technically live in a society where, demand and supply are connected. And so if demand for a certain good goes down, then the supply should technically go down as well. And so if enough people decided to change, then that would maybe start something, but that's hard to say because it's not an individual who's creating the problems of the world.
Yeah.
It's industry.
Yeah. So personally, I do think that the meat industry, or just eating meat in general, I think it's probably not ethical, but I think it's less expedient to focus on this one action that I'm doing rather than trying to get, because quite frankly, I think people would be more willing to make things more kinder to the animals and make things less voting for practices that will reduce the production of methane and reduce waste and stuff like that. I think people are more willing to do that than to forgo meat entirely, especially in America.
Right.
So I think it's just more expedient to focus my actions on like political advocacy rather than just trying to convince people to completely change their diets.
Right.
And I think that if we make moves that make meat less of a very easy choice, or make it more ethical, or make it more sustainable, that will encourage more people to eat less meat, which will encourage people to make other meat replacement products.
Right.
So I feel like trying to focus my attention on like cutting out meat from my diet entirely, or animal products from my diet entirely, is like less well spent than if I'm like trying to get people to eat less meat, or trying to get people to like
on a larger scale. Yeah, I agree. When I think about what can I do and what can I tell other people that is something that could be useful, is my biggest thing is the disconnect that people feel and people experience when it comes to food. I mean, you go into any supermarket today and you walk in and there's just all this prepackaged stuff, and it's easy to just go and grab a package of pink, noodly looking substance that a lot of people, I don't think, ever connect all the way to like what it took to get that product there.
Yeah.
I mean, like there was an animal that was raised, and then it was killed, and then it was processed, and then it was transported, and now it's, in your hand at this grocery store. And I think that is like one thing that if people are like, what can I do to like to know more about like what I can do to help, is I think just having a better connection with food and where it comes from, which is hard because good food is expensive. And, if you're eating locally, which is more environmentally friendly, and local farms are much more ethical in their practices, that stuff's more expensive. And in that way, everything is just so connected, because how can people be worried about, eating quote unquote right food when they're worried about just getting food, period, on the table,
Yeah.
And it's a societal pressure on a lot of things need to change, and it's not fair to, at least I don't think it's fair to put the blame on people who are in any kind of economic situation that they're in, because they're just doing the best they can. And, it's just like, it's so hard to like, wrap your head around like what needs to get done, Yeah.
Well, and it's not like, the issue is that like you can't really tell someone, like people aren't bad people for eating meat. Like so it's complicated, and I think there is value in like doing the best that you can, and like reducing your meat intake, because like a lot of people eat more meat than is healthy for them. So even like if you just brought your meat consumption down to like a healthy range.
Right. Yeah. Like in America, meat consumption is very romanticized. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, it's like, it's what makes you a man, if you're a man.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of like, what to do on a local level, I agree that like, political advocacy is the thing to do to go about changing stuff. I mean, we live in a society. We live in a society. And that society is dictated by the laws that are implemented, I mean, if we could eventually get something federally passed that was actually a useful environmental protection, I mean, it would work.
Yeah.
And it's just getting to that point that is, I guess, the hard part about.
Well, and it's like small steps are still steps, and it kind of sucks because
it doesn't feel like enough.
Yeah, well, and it's not really enough, but sometimes there's only so much that you can actually get from the current situation.
Yeah. And
like, at least if you have a smaller step than what is actually needed, at least something happened than nothing. So sometimes
yeah, I agree, like small acts of protest are better. I mean, they're obviously better than none. So in terms of political action and development, on the more urban scene, what do you think of green spaces and urban spaces?
Yeah, so in my research, I was looking at projects that people have already started working on. The 3 cities that were mentioned were Bangladesh, which is not in America, if you did not know, Chicago, and New York, which I think everyone knows where Chicago and New York are, if you're from America. And they were working on integrating agricultural or personal green spaces into city development, and this has a number of benefits. So if you just do rooftop gardening, that does help to offset the heat sinks, which are formed in large cities because it's just kind of a bunch of concrete and metal.
It's just a bunch of hot
stuff.
stuff.
It reflects the sun, plants kind of help to draw that heat in.
Well, yeah, evapotranspiration is a cooling process.
Yeah. So rooftop gardens do help a little bit, but they tend to be kind of harsh on most of the plants that you would grow up there because they're just kind of constantly exposed to the sun.
Yeah.
And they don't do as much because it's just a very small area. So a few more kind of exciting things are putting plants on the outside walls of buildings.
Oh, instead of on top.
Yeah, so vertical. Or you could do both. Having plants grown inside the building, like a greenhouse. And that can be done in the dirt, or you can use aquaponics, aeroponics, or hydroponics. And aquaponics has the added benefit that you can grow fish, and the plants that are growing in the
space,
in the water, can kind of provide habitat for each other and exchange of nutrients. And then you also have fish to eat and rice or whatever is
growing. Right.
And then those can either be private or public, so it can either be a space for people to come and congregate for cheaper than if they were going to the movies.
Right.
Or it can be a place to actually commercially produce food, so that then you are reducing transport costs and transport emissions and the energy it takes to keep the food from going bad before it gets to wherever it's going.
Right.
And it also helps to reduce the effect, or eliminate, if you do it enough, to eliminate the effects of food deserts and just the unsustainability of living in a city if you're not connected to the broader rural areas around you,
right,
which may not be very close to you. Right.
Yeah, like in my research, I found that like 1 in 4 households in America experience food insecurity. And, you know, that's definitely associated with just the fact that I think a lot of food just it's expensive. It's expensive, and a lot of people feel like they, you know, either they don't have the space or they don't have the time or, you know, any of that to be able to help with their food insecurity. And like in my experience, community gardens are a good way to like help that. I mean, like I participated in a community garden last year, and it was a very small fee monthly, and you got like a lot of food every week. And, you know, it was just people in the community that would go and take care of it, and you could take care of it if you want, or you could just pay the fee and still get benefits from this, you know, community garden.
It wasn't like you were paying for your own plot, you were
just paying for like the whole thing.
The upkeep, yeah.
Yeah.
So another way to get more locally produced produce is CSAs, which are community supported agriculture, where you pay a fee and then the farmer will send you a box of whatever he was growing at the time for like every week or bi-weekly.
Yeah, I think it was really similar to that. It was just, but it was community run. It was like,
okay, so you had the chance to participate.
You had the chance to participate if you wanted to, but you didn't have to.
Yeah.
And so like I thought that was a really like nice way to do it. And the thing about urban green spaces and using these garden spaces in cities is, so like in my research I read about this notion of like using green spaces as a way to like soft protest. And it was people who would guerrilla garden. It was people, you know, it's throwing seed bombs. It's, you know, advocating for green spaces that might be getting taken down. I mean, you know, look no further than the environmental movement of, you know, the 70s and 80s, where it was really big. There was one instance where a woman went onto her public park space and grew a neat and orderly garden that provided food. And it was like a fairly large garden, but it was just, you know, it was tidy, it was well kept, and it wasn't hurting anybody. And the Department of Parks and Recreation came and ripped it all out. And when they did that, she went to them and was like, "Why did you rip my garden?" And they were like, "Well, that's not the appropriate use of this public space." And her response was, "It's a public space. I wasn't making any money on it. I wasn't harming anyone with it, so why did you rip it out?" Like, that's a good example, I think, of just what people think like spaces should look like, and just like the societal pressures around what a space should look like. For instance, you know, in the Southwest, we've had a large debate over what do we do with all this grass in front of people's houses? And a lot of people are like, well, it's so pretty and I want to keep it. But do you really think grass is that pretty, or have you just lived with it your whole life? You know, there's a lot of other options out there when it comes to like keeping your yard looking nice, like natural plants and that sort of thing. I mean, in Las Vegas, they've started implementing a program to pay people to get rid of their grass. You know, you contact the city of Las Vegas, and you're like, "Listen, I'm living in Las Vegas. I've got grass on my plot. I want you to come take it out. And they're like, great, we'll pay you. And then they come and take it out, and then, you do with that space what you will. Just a lot of interesting ways to go about it that aren't just the norm that we've always decided to do.
Yeah. Well, it's not like grass has always been what people would put in their yards.
Right. I mean, that definitely came about, I think, from the post-World War II-esque...
I think it was before that.
Was it before that?
I think so. Did it come from France?
I don't know. Maybe. But I do think that it was a byproduct of an era of extravagance. I think, like, here's just this thing, put it in front of our yard, and we don't really think about how much water it takes. Or, I mean, like what Marty said, grass is easy to take care of once you plant it, as long as you have water.
Yeah, we don't have water.
No, we don't have water. So, yeah. At the end of the day, any of these issues, sustainability, global development, any of it is impossible with just one person working on it. These are global issues, national issues, local issues, and one person can't do it all.
We've linked some helpful resources for you if you'd like to get involved. First, we have 3 congressional candidates for the 2022 election who have a campaign based on some of the topics we've talked about today. Neil Walia is running in Colorado's 1st congressional district, the Denver area, as a Democrat on a platform partially built on making a greener economy and regenerative and urban agriculture. Jared Huffman is running in California's 2nd congressional district, NorCal Coastline, as a Democrat on a platform partially built on food access and affordability, reduction of environmental impacts, and water conservation. Alex Jones, with an A instead of an E, is running as an independent in Colorado's 5th congressional district, Colorado Springs to San Isabel National Forest, on a platform partially built on water conservation, converting non-arable land to arable, and implementation of vertical farming. If any of these candidates sound interesting to you, we have linked their campaign pages. However, we strongly encourage you to do your own research before choosing a candidate to vote for. Ballotopedia and JustFacts.org, linked below, are sites that can help you in your research. Remember to get your information from a variety of news sources to help avoid bias in reporting. If campaign projects aren't your jam, we've also linked a few NGOs that are working towards some of the issues we've outlined in today's podcast. Kiss the Ground seeks to educate people on problems with agriculture as well as how to fix those problems. Kiss the Ground is based out of Los Angeles, California. The Rodell Institute seeks to educate consumers and producers on the benefits of regenerative organic agriculture and to work with producers to implement better practices. Based out of Kutztown, Pennsylvania. EcoFarm is a project based out of SoCal, California, that works toward more ecological farming practices through education, connecting interested groups, and advocacy. These 3 NGOs are well rated. The Carbon Underground, another NGO whose rating we could not find, attempts to promote regenerative agriculture through education and practice. If you'd like to get involved with NGOs, Charity Navigator and Charity Watch, both linked below, are great resources to get started to make sure your money and time is truly going towards the cause you intend to benefit. If you're interested in what we've discussed today, you can look in the description below for the links to the resources we used in our research, as well as the people and organizations that I've discussed.
Special thanks to Andy Young, our professor for the Honors 200 Development class, and Marty Pool, who was willing to interview with us.